The third thing that I think is very dangerous for our country has been the promotion of uniformity over unity. The desire is not that we should look at different points of view and try and come to a consensus. The desire instead is to impose from top down some sort of notion of what is India and what is nationalist and what is patriotic that everybody else must conform to.
Hi everyone, you are on the Compass Open Talk series. An author, politician, and former international civil servant. A man who is representing the Thiruvananthapuram constituency in Kerala for the third time in the House of the People. Here we have with us the person who is trying to analyze what it is to be an Indian and what is to be in India. The Honorable Member of Parliament, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Welcome, Dr. Tharoor.
Good to be with you, Rohini.
Thank you so much, sir. So, we are going through an unprecedented time in the history, political history of India, maybe. We are going through such a fascist regime. So, what is your take on the current RSS project of transforming India in both ways, politically and culturally?
Well, I tend not to use that particular word, fascist, because it is a term of abuse now in politics rather than of analysis or description. But what worries me very much about the RSS BJP project today is that it has fundamentally affected three things that are essential for our country. The first is the sense that is enshrined in the Constitution, which is that every Indian, irrespective of where you're born, your language, your religion, your caste, whatever it may be, if you're a citizen of India, you have the same rights as every other citizen of India. That fundamental idea is challenged by the Hindutva project of essentially making Hindus sort of the first-class citizens of the Hindu Rashtra, and everybody else is either a guest or an interloper. That, to my mind, is very dangerous. The second thing I worry about is that the institutions that uphold our system, the institutions have been completely compromised. That is, autonomy was the key to these institutions' validity. Whether it was the judiciary, whether it was parliament, whether it was the media, whether it was the information commission, whether it was the election commission, we go up and down the chain. The government always had to be accountable to autonomous bodies that didn't take their orders from the government. What has happened in the last 7 years of BJP Hindutva rule is unfortunately a kind of approach which has hollowed out these institutions, has deprived them to a great extent of their autonomy, and as a result has put the nation in a position where we have very few checks and balances against the overweening power of the government. So you see, whether it's Reserve Bank governors resigning because the government wants to have its way, whether it is the one election commissioner being transferred out of the country because he want to issue a warning notice to Mr. Modi and Mr. Shah, whether it is a question of the free press being threatened by, for example, IT tax raids on a paper like the Dainik Bhaskar for showing the deaths in COVID. Example after example like this, you see that free autonomous institutions are being curbed by this government. And that, to my mind, is also a very dangerous element. The third thing that I think is very dangerous for our country has been the promotion of uniformity over unity. The desire is not that we should look at different points of view and try and come to a consensus. The desire instead is to impose from top down some sort of notion of what is India and what is nationalist and what is patriotic that everybody else must conform to. So you see this in various things. You see this in the delegitimization of dissent, where critics like myself or others are very quickly denounced as anti-national. We may have proud nationalist credentials, but we are dismissed as anti-national because we dared to criticize the government. So the conflation of the ruling party with the government and the government with the country is part of this problem. The second problem is the curbing of freedom of thought and expression. You see this in the campuses, where, as you know, they've gone and parked a tank in Jawaharlal Nehru University. They're trying to arrest student protesters under the sedition law, all of these things. Third, you see it in what I already mentioned, the pressure upon the free media. And fourth, you see it across the board in the kind of attacks on people trying to express their own free views. It can be cartoonists being persecuted. It can be a journalist like Siddiq Kapan going to look at the sad rape in Hathras and finding himself locked up for a year of preventive detention. It can be in the UAPA Act itself. So example after example. So these three big issues taken together, to my mind, have divided the country in an alarming way, while the powers that be have proceeded on a headlong rush to autocracy, taking us away from the democracy that previous governments have tried to build up.
So you were saying about unity, and that took me back to your books, which always explained and hailed about unity and diversity. The latest one being The Battle of Belonging, what it means to be an Indian. Yeah, so you were explaining about different religions, languages, and castes. We exist and coexist as one. But as you said, it's a very contradictory thing. We saw in Jantar Mandir, anti-Muslim slogans were raised. So do you think that India as a country is now constantly attacking the marginalized ones, like the Muslims, the Dalits, in that kind?
Well, I would say that it's not India, the country, that is attacking them. It's certain elements who are perhaps encouraged or condoned by the powers that be. Not everybody agrees with this, mind you. When Dalits are flogged for doing their job of skinning the carcass of a cow, when Muslims are whipped and in fact forced to chant Jai Shri Ram and so on. What this has done, I am quite proud of my Hinduism, but this is an insult to my Hinduism. So the soaring majesty of the Upanishadic faith being reduced to something like the team identity of the British football hooligan. He says, my team is always right. If you're supporting the other team, I'm going to hit you on the head. That's the British football hooligan. That's what some of these lumpen elements adopting the garb of Hindutva are doing. So I don't agree with your question, Rohini, that it is India as a whole that is mistreating minorities, marginalized communities, Dalits and others, Adivasis also. I think it is certain misguided elements who feel they have been given a license by the Hindutva establishment that is close to power to do what they want.
Okay. Coming to the Pegasus thing, this is something into discussion among the general public, as well as we saw in Parliament also, people are like dissenting against this conspiracy happening. So as the chairman of the standing committee on IIT, I was like wondering, what is your take? Like, people are just taking it very lightly, even after so much of dissenting voices coming against this.
Well, I won't speak as the chairman of the Standing Committee on IT, partly because the committee has not discussed it, and partly because certain individuals have gone out of their way to prevent a discussion in the committee on this matter. And since the committee has therefore not been able to have a collective view, it's difficult for me to speak on behalf of the other members. But in my personal capacity, and not as chairman of the committee, let me say that I am very seriously concerned about Pegasus, because this is a military-grade spyware that the company claims is only sold to vetted governments, and that too with the approval of the Israeli Defense Ministry. So it seems that this has been sold to the government of India. At least that is the fear or the perception or the accusation, you can use whichever word you want. And that the government of India, instead of using it against terrorists and criminal syndicates, has been using it against their political opponents for narrow partisan advantage. That is, Indian taxpayers' money has been spent in order, for example, for the BJP to know what Prashant Kishore is thinking during the Bengal elections, whom Rahul Gandhi of the Congress is speaking to, who 40 named journalists are trying to contact in the opposition of the government, what they're hearing. Now, this kind of thing is a very, very dangerous and I would say illegal action. Dangerous because it undermines our democratic freedoms, the right to privacy, which the Supreme Court has upheld. But also, I would say that we should worry very seriously about the legality of it, because while there is a right to intercept communications, there is no right under Indian law to place malware or spyware on somebody's devices, resources, or networks. That's very clearly spelled out in sections 43 and 66 of the IT Act of 2000. So if we are in a position where our own government has violated the law for the political advantage of the ruling party, that is like a Watergate scandal in India. Now, you're right that unfortunately in our country, a lot of people treat this very lightly, don't take it as such a serious matter. But there are others who will tell you that if the truth of all this is established, it could and should even bring down a democratic government, because in no democracy can a government do this. You're taking tax money from the public, you're spending it illegally in violation of the law to promote and protect your own political party. If that is true and proven, that would be a complete brazen defiance of every principle of democracy. And that's why I think that the Supreme Court is now seized of the matter. Many people have gone to the Supreme Court, not just one or two, filing PILs. At least 10 Indians have had their phones submitted to forensic analysis by the Amnesty International lab, and they've found out through analysis that their phones were infected by Pegasus. And that in the case of Prashant Kishore, as recently as the day that his phone was examined, somebody was snooping on what he was doing. Now, if the government hasn't done this, the matter is still extremely serious, because it means a foreign government is trying to interfere in the Indian political process. So what is more dismaying than about that is that the government seems to be completely relaxed about such a major breach of national security. So either way, the matter is very serious.
Yeah. Now, I think I should ask you about the history getting changed like every day, I should say, because it's getting distorted on a daily basis. We saw August 14th observed as the Partition Horror Remembrance Day, and we also saw the UGC putting decision on to change the syllabus of history textbooks. So as a historian, how do you think that, how much, what is the limit for a political party to interfere or to alter the political history or the cultural history of a nation?
You know, it's a very good question, because reinventing and rewriting history is very much part of the BJP RSS Hindutva project. And why do they do that? It's partly because they have a chip on the shoulder about history. They have this vision of India as this pristine Hindu country that got invaded and attacked first by the Muslims, then by the Christians, namely the British, and therefore they're now reasserting the triumph of their point of view. That's one reason why they have this historical thing. When it comes to, that's particularly true of the past, of the earlier past. But in the 20th century, they have a different problem. Their problem is that people associated with their line of thinking never participated in the nationalist movement. They were not at all figures in the freedom struggle. In fact, the founder of the doctrine of Hindutva, Mr. Savarkar, wrote to the British saying he'll collaborate with them. He received a pension from the British every month. If you look at the Hindu Mahasabha, which was the forerunner politically of what then became the kind of Hindutva politics in our system, they actually collaborated with the Muslim League of Muhammad Ali Jinnah in the period when the Congress provincial governments had resigned their office in protest against the British declaring war without consulting them. They resigned, and the Hindu Mahasabha and the Muslim League collaborated with the British to run governments that they had not been elected to run. So it's a very inglorious history to look back on. How would they like to tell that history? So they would rather capture that and twist it to their own thing. Yeah. We've seen, for example, the Quit India movement. The RSS, Hindu Mahasabha, never participated, but they've been trying to celebrate Quit India. Sardar Patel was a home minister who banned the RSS. They're trying to appropriate Sardar Patel's image. If you look at the latest Partition Horrors Remembrance Day, what is it? It is an exercise in using the past to inflict new wounds on the present. It is to remind the Hindus whose votes they're seeking in UP and elsewhere that there was a time when Muslims had attacked them, and that now is the time for them to reassert themselves. Now, this kind of very divisive use of history is very damaging for our country and for really any country that would do it. I think if some political leader were to use the past to promote unity, common sense of purpose, and so on in the present, I would applaud that, even if it was distorting history. If somebody with a larger heart, a larger vision, were to only highlight those aspects of history where Hindus, Muslims, Christians, everyone worked together and progressed together, or saved the nation together, and only highlighted that, that is also a distortion of history, because there have been clashes. But that kind of distortion you wouldn't object, because it's for a noble purpose of uniting the country, inspiring people. When you're distorting history for a petty purpose, to divide people, to stoke up hatred, to actually get communities to feel bad about each other, that, to my mind, is a terrible misuse of history.
Now, coming to the political party you represent, the International Congress, it has been a political organization that was very crucial before and after independence. So do you think there is an urgent need to reintrospect or to introspect into within the Congress party at a time when there is a very difficult political scenario around us, and when India is re-electing BJP into power for the second term? So do you think that there is a need to introspect within the party for a better prepared future?
Not so much introspect, because we've heard that word too often, we've introspected too much. Rather than introspection, what we need is action. Action to revive the party, to stimulate and energize the organization and the party workers, and to remind people of the values we stand for, which are good, traditional Indian values of pluralism, mutual respect, acceptance of difference, celebration of common purpose and unity, aspirations for a better opportunity for everyone, concern and compassion for the poor and the marginalized. All of these things together are our vision. And this vision is something that we need to once again talk about. We are unfortunately caught in a cycle or a spiral of electoral defeats. We lost in 2014, I beg your pardon, and we lost again in 2019. So my view is that when people get accustomed to defeat, they get a bit dispirited. We have to again show the party that you have the right message, you can win again, and for that you need to be energized. Today's climate in India is such that I think it's clear we can't do it alone. We need to work with the other opposition parties that share compatible views of the country, simply because that will also give confidence to everybody that we are united. Otherwise, we would divide each other's votes. Never forget the BJP came to power in 2014 with 31% of the vote. In 2019 with 37% of the vote. So even in 2019, 63% of the electorate did not vote for Mr. Modi and the BJP. But that 63 went into 20 different parties. So that's why he got this overwhelming majority, 303 seats in the Lok Sabha. What we need to do is try and talk to the 20 different parties and say, as far as possible, maybe not in all 543 seats, but as far as possible, let's avoid undercutting each other for the Lok Sabha. And I must say, if you look, for example, very seriously at the country scenario, that is a feasible scenario. There are many states where if the opposition were united, we could defeat the BJP.
I think that's it. We come to the end of the compass.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Rohini.
you so much, sir.
Really enjoyed talking to you. All the best.
Thank you so much.